I want to start with your story. And I'd love for you to share with us what health and wellness meant to you, even in your childhood home, like your earliest memories. If you grew up around healthy people, if you grew up in a conversation around exercise or nutrition. The reason I like to start there is I'm so intrigued with the foundation of people's lives when they end up living a life that's so aligned with what matters to them. And that is you. I know that what you do in wellness is so important to you. So I'm
Thank you.
curious, what were the early messages that you got around wellness?
Well, I definitely didn't grow up in a family that wellness was even a topic. I mean, I grew up with a single mom who worked full time. And so I was thinking about this the other day. I thought, oh my gosh, I think we ate fast food probably 3 days a week.
Oh, yeah.
It was so new at the time, it was
Yeah.
exciting and it was easy. And of course, easy for my mom who was stressed, working, provide. So, I mean, we didn't even talk about it. And this conversation wasn't, certainly wasn't in my family. Now, certain
Hmm.
talking to patients now, I know it was a conversation in some other families, but it certainly wasn't in mine. My mom was not making buckwheat pancakes, and asking me
Totally.
to not eat sugar. We had Twinkies and, in my lunch and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And we just didn't really talk about wellness at all. And my mom certainly was never an exerciser and didn't really have that example of wellness
Yeah.
um,
It
growing
was
up.
definitely not the topic then that it is now. I remember
No.
going to McDonald's on the way home from school before I would go home and eat
Right.
dinner, just because it was
Yeah.
fun. You met up with your friends there.
Yeah. And there was no talk about like, oh, we should do that in moderation and we shouldn't really eat that every day. And
Yeah.
no, it was definitely not in the topic of being unhealthy. Anyway, I remember when the big gulp came out
Yeah.
in our family. It was like so exciting. We were going to get the big gulp. I
Yeah.
think at that time it was maybe 18 ounces or something,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and, could we drink it all? That was the big thing. So of soda, which is such
So I
a
know.
different conversation than we're having now, and certainly a different conversation than I'm having with my own children,
Yeah.
and when they grow up, it'd be interesting to hear what they say about our
Yeah.
home.
What about exercise? When did exercise become a part of your life?
Yeah, I think that was probably my first insight to wellness is, I loved to exercise and first runs were like, "Oh my gosh, I feel so good. This feels great." And of course, running continues to be a part of my life
Yeah.
today. Um,
Did
but
you run in high school?
mhm,
Oh,
yeah, and
good.
got a lot of, um, positive reinforcement from
Yeah.
sports in junior high and high school, and um, and just felt so much better when I was busy and with sports and
Yeah.
that
I was the
adrenaline.
same way. Yeah, exercise for me was definitely the portal into feeling good in my body. Food has
Yes.
come later, and for me, like, much later. I'm just starting
Oh,
to put the dots together, like, I think I started in my late 30s to be like, "Oh, I should sort of stop drinking regular soda," Now I'm
yeah, me
49.
too,
So
me
now
too.
I have a better conversation with myself about it, but it's totally a work in progress for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think in high school, I drank a Coke, a candy bar, and a bag of chips most days.
Yeah, yeah.
But I did
When did
love exercise. I did love
Yeah,
exercise and knew that my body just felt so much better when I was exercising.
yeah. And what about medicine? That interest in pursuing it professionally, was that a high school thing, or did that come later where you thought you could go into that field?
Yeah, I mean, I just wasn't even thinking about my career. I don't think in high school,
Yeah.
reading my journal is definitely a lot of boy and drama talk. Looking
Yeah.
back,
Normal,
it
yeah.
was not very deep or insightful at all. But anyway, but I did in my junior year of high school, my best friend, Nancy said, I'm going to do this medical assisting class, which was brand new to our school. We could sign up and do that. And so I said, well, might as well sign up with you to
Yeah,
do that. She hated it. I loved it. And then
I love it.
I just kept going from there. My senior year, I ended up doing medical assisting,
Okay.
um, and then just got jobs right in high school as a nursing assistant and knew I was going to do something in the medical field, but it wasn't until about a year into my college education that I decided that nursing would be what I would go
Yeah.
into.
And what was it like to be a nurse in those early days? Your first days on the job?
Yeah, I remember my first rotation as a nurse's aide. Of course, they put you in the nursing homes with
Yeah.
old, with, and I just loved it. I loved my conversations with
Yeah.
the patients. You know, it was just hearing their stories. It was really connecting with those patients. I just loved it.
Yeah, that does not surprise me. I can imagine you sitting there and listening. Well,
Oh,
and
I just,
also listening. I mean, you and I have talked about that as a theme in your practice, and we'll get more into
mm,
how you started your practice. But I love hearing that you knew or you were noticing early on that you like to listen because I think that's such a huge part of the art of what you do now. So the seeds were planted.
yeah. Well, I don't know if I knew I loved listening at that time, but it was not in that insightful for
Yeah.
sure in my younger years. But
And where did you go from there? Did you get into a general practice or a hospital rotation?
yeah, then of course, going through, my first job was a nursing assistant in a rehab facility, which of course I loved,
Okay.
stroke victims and spinal cord injuries and loved that. But my first job out of nursing school was in the operating room
Mm.
as a surgical nurse.
Take us through how you decide to get into hormone health. So you're fine. Your base is Western medicine. You're educated. You're
Yeah.
getting all this insight into patients. What are you learning about patients that intrigues you and leads you to pursuing this? What you've done now, which is open your own practice.
Yeah, well, after nursing school, I decided I had my babies and then went back to school to get my nurse practitioner. And, felt incredibly selfish to do that at the time, but I really
Hmm.
wanted to continue my education. And, my husband was like, well, I don't really know why you'd want to do that. Isn't,
Yeah.
being a nurse good enough? But
Yes.
again, going back to school, really loved connecting with patients. But during my nursing school or during my nurse practitioner school, my mom passed away of a heart attack at
Yeah.
age 61, which then led me to wanting to work in cardiology. And I was lucky enough to get a job in cardiology and right out
Was
of
this while you
nurse
were still
practitioner.
in school? Did you have the job in cardiology?
No, I just did my just
Okay.
my last year of training with them
I
while I
see.
was in school, and then they offered me a job after I finished schooling, which I was super grateful for, and of course wanted to learn everything I could about cardiology and what could I have done to help my mom and how can we prevent this from happening to other wonderful women. So and men, of course, too. But
Yeah.
um, and so during that time, it really wasn't the preventative medicine that I was kind of hoping for, and I think that was my true, guiding light through school is wanting to prevent illness.
Yeah.
Instead of we were doing a lot of Band-Aid health, and I think that's what medicine, modern medicine as we know it is excellent at emergency care and of course sick medicine,
Hmm.
and taking care of when you're sick, boy, we can get you better but is your quality of life better? How are we going to prevent this heart attack from happening in the first place? So, and not a lot of teaching for people either, like what was a good lifestyle. It was more
Hmm.
take these medicines, be compliant, see you in a year.
Yeah. As you're experiencing those conversations, is it in the back of your mind, like, I would do this differently?
No, not really. I
Yeah.
think, what in the back at what was going on at the time too is I would have I remember one patient coming in and asking me, she was on hormone therapy, and it was our practice at that time to tell people that they were at a higher risk of heart attack and strokes with hormone care. Um, and she said, well, I'm not going off my hormones, but tell me the safest hormone. So went back, started researching on our resource pages up to date with the other cardiologist and kind of came out and say, hey, well, there are some safe options to hormone therapy. So, of course, we told her those options, but it got me thinking, like, well, maybe we don't have this story right,
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
hormone therapy. And then at the time, I was also working at the Malahi Free Clinic and seeing a lot of middle aged women who were struggling, like, oh my gosh, my skin is so dry, or I'm depressed. And those are the complications that they were telling me, or the complaints that they were telling me. They weren't really severe, but then once I started thinking about menopause and what were the symptoms of menopause, I wasn't in menopause at the time. So, and started asking them, well, wow, what is your intimacy like? How is your vaginal health? How
Yeah.
is your mood? And it's like then they just started unraveling. It's like, oh my gosh, you don't need to put more lotion on. You need hormones,
Yes.
you know?
And when you started seeing that, was there a way to prescribe hormones to them at that current position, or did you have to leave that position and actually go start your own practice?
Yeah, certainly not in cardiology. That wasn't our place, but in the Malahi Free Clinic, I was starting to learn how to. But again, I had no idea how to prescribe hormones at that time.
Yeah.
It's something we certainly never talked about in our schooling, in my nurse practitioner school. So, just by doing my own research and learning. And then at the same time, my husband came to me and said, I think I need testosterone therapy. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, that's going to give you a heart attack. We don't do that. And then, of course, he goes, no, really look into this. I think you really need to check this
Yeah.
out. And so I started reading it. And then along with all the women I was seeing in the, at the free clinic, and then also in the cardiology clinic, and just starting asking better questions. Or not better
Yeah.
questions, just different questions, right? And
Yeah.
things that, um, are you having erections? Are you able to have intimacy? Are you able to, are you having hot flashes and night sweats and poor sleep? And so it was through that I was started doing research, went to classes, started going to all sorts of hormone conferences. Um, and then, of course, when I would go to a hormone conference, I would come back and tell some of my colleagues or friends what I was learning. And of course, get a lot of pushback at the time, like, what are you doing? Why would you do that? We don't do hormones.
Why is
Horm
there that battle between that push pull, that tension that you're describing? What is that about, do you think?
For the most part, I think, we can say the typical things like, it's what we learned, and it's hard to
Yeah.
unlearn what we've learned. I remember asking another cardiologist, like, wow, this guy's on testosterone therapy, or this woman's on hormone therapy. And then in discussing their case, uh, I was like, oh, well, we don't do that. But I didn't ask them, well, why don't we do that?
Yeah.
How do we know that's true?
Yeah.
It was just more of what they said, and who they
Yes.
were was undetermined, other than, the Women's Health Initiative, which we could, which caused all sorts of um, damage to the hormone therapy world, especially for women.
Yeah. Maybe it's fair to just in your summary. I know there's a lot out there right now, a lot of content out about the Women's Health Initiative, but in your mind, will you give us, for the listener who might be unfamiliar with that, the research that came out, will you give us a summary of how that kind of colored hormone replacement
Yeah.
therapy?
Yeah. In 2002, the Women's Health Initiative came out. Um, and then the study was women on hormone therapy, and it was abruptly stopped due to concerns about breast cancer risk.
Yeah.
And then one arm of the study was stopped, and then the other arm of the study was stopped later on for risk of stroke and heart attack. Um, of course, by 2006, most of the findings of that study were found to be very biased and not, they were mostly retracted.
Yeah.
So, but of course, in 2002, what made the media was hormone therapy causes cancer, stop it. I remember the Time
Yeah.
magazine art, cover was
Yeah.
that. It was just very sensationalized, and I think it's easy to say things that are bad,
Yes.
like with this new weight loss medicine. Ozempic, people are like, it's terrible. And if we had one study that came out that showed some negative harm, that may stop this whole industry itself too. But that's basically
Yeah.
what happened in 2002. Prescriptions were on the rise for hormone therapy. Women were finding that this was incredibly helpful. And then that study came out, and boy, just slammed it shut without asking a whole lot of questions,
Yes. And
about the
so
study.
do you feel like the research now is asking different questions?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think we're also able to look at that data better and
Mhm.
finding, what the Women's Health Initiative did tell us is that synthetic progestins aren't necessarily the best thing, but are
Yeah.
they, and there's other options out there for sure. So I think that's, and again, there's so many wonderful podcasts right now talking about the
Yeah.
um, the complications of that study. And I think probably one of the best resources that I have about and what I tell my patients to read if they have questions, and because that's still lingering, that fear, and I'll
Definitely.
hear even patients come tell me that their primary care are quoting the Women's Health Initiative, which shouldn't be quoted when you're discussing hormone therapy.
Yeah.
It's just, it was $1 billion study gone not great.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
wasn't well done.
Yeah. And what role, now that you're in your own practice, what role does research play in these conversations that you have with patients? Tell us about that moment when the patient comes in and you're trying to find the right treatment.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, and this kind of goes back to me even starting my practice because I came from a very traditionally grounded, rooted background, very vetted in evidence based medicine. I mean, every paper you did, every suggestion you had have to be based on evidence.
Yeah.
So, it took me probably 2 years of reviewing the literature and going back because, again, I would go to these conferences and say, like, oh, wow, look at all this evidence for hormone therapy. And then I'd come back and tell some of my colleagues, and they'd say, oh, that's not right. That's bad. It's like, oh my gosh. Then I'd be scared and I'd go back into the research
Yeah.
and I'd go back and I was like, okay, no, we have this story wrong. We have this story wrong. Like, I'm reading the research articles. And randomized controlled trials and seeing the evidence. So I was able to ground myself because I was scared to start a hormone
Yeah.
practice, based because it was
I
definitely against
understand
the
why.
grain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's against the grain, and there's a lot of energy and anxiety and fear around it, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is because I feel like you represent the conversation around it from a little bit of a perspective that's above the fear and the we can really get into the weeds around, we have to go through menopause and it's going to be terrible. And I find when what I've learned from you and hearing about your practice is getting above it into wellness and asking better questions.
yeah,
And you seem to really have that balance of, you're based in research, as you said, and evidence, and also you're willing to challenge, some of it and follow your intuition.
yeah. Because a lot of the things that I mean, really, the Women's Health Initiative is the cornerstone of negative information. There's probably maybe 5 articles that kind of show some negativity, but a lot of them are not randomized controlled trials, they're association
Yeah.
studies, they're kind of grasping at straws to show some negativity, but the vast majority of the evidence is very, very positive. And so now, can we say it was 10,000 women? No, but when you look at it as in a collective, it's incredibly powerful. And with
Yeah.
the risks are very minimal. And I think that's just what frightens women is they'll hear the risks and they'll say, well, the risks of hormone therapy. It's like, well, let's talk about the risks of not doing hormone therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think those, and it's the weights and the balances, and that's where I feel like as practitioners, and we have to tell the patient, here are the risks, here are the benefits, and then intertwine that with what are their goals.
Yeah.
Do they have a goal to have better intimacy with their partner? Do they have
Yeah.
a goal to sleep through the night? Do they have a goal to have mood stabilization?
I think
So
one of the best things people can do, and you'll have to tell me if you agree with this or not, but I always tell people to keep a note, keep like track your physical sensations, your experience, just like you would if you wanted to lose weight and you were going to try a different nutritional path, you would start by writing down everything you eat.
right.
Because I find that even I have two teenage daughters who are 17, and I was talking to them about their health and their cycles. We were just on vacation together. And just starting early, like no one talked to me about that young.
Right.
Like notice how you feel, notice how your body moves through a cycle so that you can start to understand your own rhythms and patterns. And and then I hear what you're saying is having a goal, which is again, I didn't know to do that. But I think the sooner we can do that, and no matter how old you are, but just if that is something that if nutrition and wellness and feeling good is something that's on someone's mind, it's like get curious about it and write it down so that when you
Yeah.
go into your practitioner, you can say, this is what's happening.
Right. And I think we can get so sidetracked
Yeah.
by, their agenda. What is your practitioner's agenda for the day? Is it just a wellness check instead of, and then of course getting discounted for wanting those quality of life. So that would be the thing I would tell patients too is, if you have a concern and it is a quality of life, that concern, better sleep, better mood, better intimacy,
Yeah.
that it's okay and that you
Yeah.
be listened to and it should be addressed. And there are things
Yeah.
that we can do to address that instead of saying, that's normal, that's menopause.
Yes.
This is how women age
Yes.
and men age, because they certainly
Yeah.
have their issues as well.
So what do you see in your practice? What keeps you motivated? What tell me the before and after of some either men, women, any patients who have really inspired you that keep you in this what I consider an art. I always tell you this. I think it's an
Yeah.
art more than a just do this and this equals this. So I think that's another reason why people get intimidated by it or mystified by it because it's nuanced, but
Yeah.
it starts with being observant and um, introspective, tuned in to your own experience. And then, as you said, advocating for yourself and deciding that you deserve to feel good. It's really hard
Right.
to fight that status quo and say, well, this is just how it is. This is how it's going to be.
Right. Go home, start eating better,
Yeah.
start exercising, you
So
know.
you're living through these moments of it can be better. Can you tell us some of those? Tell us about the
Yeah.
betterment that can happen in
Oh my
people's
gosh. Well, first of all,
life.
I feel like I have the best job ever.
Oh, I love hearing that.
The work is just is humbling and it's
Yeah.
just so powerful uh, and simple all at the same time,
Mhm.
right? And usually people come to me after they've been to their primary care, after they've been to an acupuncture, it's not, wherever they've gone to,
Yeah.
a variety of practitioners before they end up on my doorstep, unless they've had a friend say, "Oh, you should go see Monica." But uh, most of the time, they're pretty, this is my last hope to feel
Yeah.
better, and
Yeah.
I'm not feeling well. So a lot of women and men come in at that stage of their life. They're not sleeping well. And of course, having many typical symptoms of hot flashes and night sweats. But, some of my favorite stories are women who come in for maybe one thing. Like when a
Yeah.
patient came in and said, "Oh, I'm having a little bit of vaginal dryness and I'm a little cold at night and but everything else is fine and I'm doing great and I'm feeling
Yeah.
great. But maybe I could do better." And then you start hormone therapy and they'll say, "Wow, I didn't know I could feel so good.
Yeah.
I didn't know how bad I was feeling until I felt good again."
Yes. And it's
And
finding that treatment that's the balance between the different ways that all those symptoms interact, combined with labs, which is a big part of your
right.
practice, and combined with listening. Is that how you see it, where it's all these different data points coming together in a way
Yeah.
that's different than speaking with a general practitioner or general physician?
Yeah. I mean, we have patients fill out a pretty big questionnaire before they come
Okay.
in. So we are asking things like, have you had loss of muscle? Little things that maybe they hadn't thought about, mood, irritability, cold, dry skin, of course, vaginal dryness, and all the typical symptoms you'd think about in a postmenopausal way, hot flashes, headaches, feeling past their prime, brain fog. So we
Yeah.
we get that list, and so I'm primed when they come in to know what their suffering looks like
Yeah.
and then what their pain points are. And then, of course, we do labs and we look at their labs and then listening how they put that together. When did these symptoms first start? If they started in your mid 40s, that's most likely a hormonal problem and we
Yeah.
can address those. Now, if they've had anxiety and depression, poor sleep since they were a teenager, probably not something I can
Yeah.
really help them work on, but I can help set expectations
Yeah.
at that point too. And what are realistic expectations of the hormones, um, combined with what they are. So we look at their labs, we look at their story, and then just listening to how they put that together and listening to what what feels right in their body.
Yeah.
And then, of course, telling patients the options. And I think that's a big part of what my job is to be educated in every type of hormone possibility. Explain to them what are your risks and benefits with this particular hormone therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's their job to tell me which one feels like it's going to fit right for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when they do that, they'll say, oh, that a patch feels better to me, or a cream feels better to me, or, and other times I'll say, I really think you should do your hormones vaginally because you're having such dryness. That would be my first recommendation.
Yeah.
Or I would maybe do this therapy because it's the best for libido. But again, it has to be a shared decision making. I love that statement. You know, it has to be shared because
Yeah.
if I'm talking to you, Paige, and I say, okay, I want you to do this is the only hormone that I believe in. This is my favorite, because there are certainly
Yeah.
practitioners that way. This is the only hormones that we do, or this is the only way I'm going to do them. And I say, you're going to do that, Paige. And if it doesn't feel right to you, there's no way you're going to be compliant. You may
Yeah.
try it, but the likelihood of you being compliant and getting the best results out of that medication are pretty weak.
Yeah.
So you have to
Yeah.
we have to listen to our patients. We have to listen to what feels right to them because again, you know your body and patients know even if they're not, even if they're like you mentioned, and I think this is the way I was when I was younger too. And I love that you're teaching your girls to be more connected with their bodies.
Yeah.
And a lot of women are not in tune with themselves other than they know they felt terrible.
Yes.
But they will have an intuitive sense what feels right to
Yes.
them. And, and I try to not be as biased. Of course, I'll say, okay, we don't want you to use synthetic progesterone because that increases your risk of breast cancer. So I don't prescribe that one. But all the rest, the risks and benefits, the risks are really minimal.
Yeah.
Even Premarin, which is pregnant horse's urine, is not, it's not bioidentical, right? So
Yeah.
it gets a bad rap, but it's still a pretty good hormone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and of course, you have to, and I rarely prescribe that. I don't think I've only prescribed that once in my practice, but because we have hormones that are better. But
Yeah.
again, we have to listen to the patients and kind of try to put that all together. What are their goals? How do they feel about it? And being educated to the types.
Yeah. It's so powerful to think of it that way and to offer that up to people who are listening, because I think just as you're describing listening to the patients, we have to listen to our bodies.
Yes.
And you're describing that we intuitively understand our bodies, and I agree with that. And also there's a way to get more conscious about it. There's a way to get more
Yes.
intentional about it. And I think as women, we're just not socialized to say, is this true for me? That's not the earliest messages we get are more about caring for others, and putting others' needs before our own to the point where I would describe myself as completely self ignoring.
Mm.
Like when my kids were little, this is such a silly example, but like I would always be holding my pee. Like I would never go to the bathroom on time, which is actually really unhealthy for you. But I would only go to the bathroom when it was like right for everybody in the family for me to go to the bathroom. Maybe that's an extreme case, but I know that there's women listening who can relate to that.
Yeah.
And it's just the simplest switch, but it's so difficult to challenge your autopilot, and to say, oh, I have to take care of myself. Like I have to eat first, or it's so silly. It's like that airplane, put your mask on first. But
Right.
I think why people use that analogy so often for women is because it's so instinctive. It's just drilled into us to put the mask on other people first.
Right.
And so I think a lot of your practice and you educating your patients is about that, like
Yes.
tuning in, becoming an advocate for your own health. What do you feel like is wellness? Like now that you've heard all these different symptoms and you've seen people get better, and you're clearly inspired by that. Your face lit up when you were talking about how much better, how people can feel good in a way they didn't think was possible.
Right.
So now that you've have all that, experience, professional experience and personal experience in your own life, what can we do to stay well? And what is wellness in your mind? The healthiest people that you know, or the healthiest version of yourself. What does that mean? What does that look like for
Yeah.
you?
I mean, I think wellness is different that's a very individual question.
Yeah.
Wellness to me is being able to go on our annual girlfriend Teton hike, and I got to be stay up or else I'm going to hear it from them,
Yeah.
so and go backpacking with my boys, and that's wellness to me, is staying fit enough to live, a vital life for what I define as being
Yeah.
vital. I think my sister has a different goal. She has a different, you know, wellness vision for
Yeah.
herself, and patience too. And I think we need to also be respectful. And so, trying not to be judgmental of someone's wellness path. What is their idea
Yes.
of wellness? Is it, you know, continuing to golf, 18 holes, into
Yeah.
their 90s? Or is it to just be present with their grandchildren, or, very sedentary life? And that's fine too.
Yeah. It's so true. And it's so hard. The closer you are, whether it's a child or a young adult or a spouse, the closer you are to that person, it's like, oh, they're doing that thing.
Mhm.
I work with a lot of couples and it's like, oh, he has that habit or she has that habit, and it's giving people the space and knowing that you can only really have your own experience of wellness in your own body. And it's
Yeah.
that boundary of like, how much can you impact or influence somebody else's choices? I've told you this before, but Boyd is way healthier in his diet than I am. So I'm eating chips and salsa, and I consider the salsa like a vegetable, because
Right.
it might have tomatoes in it. And he's like, oh my gosh, and he gives me a lot of space, which I'm so grateful for.
Yeah.
But I still know how he feels and he will support me when and if I decide to eat
Yeah.
better. I mean, I don't eat terrible, but that is definitely an
No.
area that I could improve upon. Do you have an area in your own life where you feel like you could be healthier? And how do you handle your
Oh,
limitations of your
yeah.
own wellness?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think same as you, Paige, my diet is, again, like I went from, mentioning that I had a Coke and bag of chips and a candy bar most
Yeah.
of my life every day. But, and I think I drank Coke until mid 30s, so,
Same. Yeah.
um, sugar, everything. So I think, diet has been a struggle for me. And I think it's just, maybe a product of what I grew up with too. I mean, we were a processed food family,
Yeah.
um, and easy foods, and have a super, super sweet tooth. So, but it's funny. I'll tell people that, and that know me now, and they're like, "What? I can't believe that. You're like, you're always bringing a salad to lunch and leftover vegetables and now but I still view myself as having this diet, uh, just needing to be fine-tuned. I heard a nutritionist say one time that when she changed to be vegan and someone
Yeah.
asked her how long it took her to become a vegan, and she said 7 years. And I really like that answer because and that's kind of my strategy as I look back, okay, when I was 30, I was eating a bowl of cereal and a Coke for breakfast.
I get it. I get no judgment from me.
To now trying to eat a very, I would say, I think most people would consider I have a very, healthy
Yeah.
diet. But again, it's always a struggle to make those right choices and try to think, okay, my goals are, and I know I need to make sacrifices today to get to tomorrow to prevent
Yeah.
chronic illness, right? So we have to make that payment today and we have to make those better choices today. So I'll set a mantra like last year my little diet mantra was greens and beans. So I was like, every day I want to try to eat a cup of beans and a cup of greens. So, or 2 cups of greens. So that was something I tried to really focus on. And when I was doing my little journaling in the morning and thinking, okay, how am I doing this week? Well, I've done terrible. I haven't done it
Yeah.
at all. So maybe this week I'm going to be better. And so I don't definitely, I try to, definitely, I encourage this with my patients too, to just not really get down on themselves um, when they haven't committed fully to something. Just better is better. Small
Yeah.
changes today will be, if you can make a small change every year, it's going to have a profound, 10-year
Yeah.
outlook. So,
Do you talk to people about that as it coincides with their hormone replacement therapy or with their weight loss program?
oh,
Like, do you?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it has to be part of the conversation because, we cannot out hormone lifestyle.
Yeah.
So, and then, or just, we will just have different expectations, like, okay, you want to gain muscle mass? Well, I can give you testosterone and estrogen and progesterone, which will all help the muscle function and muscle building. But unless you're feeding it and exercising it, it's not going to help that much.
Yeah.
What we do outside of hormones is probably at least 80 and you might even argue 90% of it.
Wow.
So what we're feeding and how we're moving our body, we need to feed this is the way I think about it for myself too and tell my patient, we need to be feeding our body fuel that is good fuel and high quality fuel. And as we get older, we just, like we see our kids and I think they could probably take a hamburger and french fries and get every little bit of nutrients they need from that just because their bodies are so young and able to kind of distill that nutrition down. Their bodies are very efficient at that, taking what they need, getting all the vitamin A or whatever they need
Yeah.
out of that, happy meal. But as we get older, our bodies are less efficient. And so we just need to be more thoughtful about what we're feeding ourselves. And
Yeah.
so just trying to feed it more whole foods and natural foods. And I think this is one peeve I have in the wellness space is you have to be keto, you have to be vegetarian, you have to be something. It's like, we don't really have to be any of those things. We just try to do better.
Yeah. Better is better.
Yeah.
I want to go back to what you said earlier that your mom passing of a heart attack in her early 60s inspired your career path to some extent. Do you feel now at this point in your career, having gone on your own, do you feel like you've made that impact that you have sought to make? Do you think your mom would be proud? Are you still inspired by women's health in this deep, connected way to how it's impacted you, really personally in your life?
I mean, I know she would be so proud of me.
Yeah, I know she would be too.
Have I made an impact on patients? I don't know. I don't know if that from especially a cardiovascular standpoint. I
Yeah,
mean, I see markers, I see, when we follow their blood work, Their blood sugars get better, their cholesterol gets better, their inflammation markers get better, which we
Yeah.
know all reduce the risk of cardiovascular events. And again, the research shows that if we do start hormone therapy early on, within those first 10 years of menopause, the risk of cardiovascular events is definitely is significantly less. So that's my hope, is that I have made an impact on
Yeah.
educating women. And, I think just educating women to, when they come into the office, and, I always ask symptoms of heart disease in part
Mhm.
of my assessment, and to educate them that it is the number one killer of women,
Yeah.
not
Well,
just
I
men, but
always
women.
this isn't gonna surprise you, but I also think of it symbolically, because that's often how I think. But heart health is also just joy in life and happy health. Are you
Yes.
experiencing feeling good? And is your heart beating and upbeat, like
Yeah.
uplifted? And I think of your practice and how you stand for optimal health and wellness as contributing to that conversation in a person's life. And so when I think of it that way, I love the way that you framed it around evidence and it's beautiful. And also, it's like having that conversation with yourself and then that leading you to pursue either hormone replacement therapy or any kind of, wellness treatment that's maybe outside of the narrow conversation that you've had about your health can contribute to you feeling better in life and having a more, I think you used the word vital earlier, this
Yeah.
vitality around you, which certainly impacts people's overall experience, which is what it's all about.
Yeah. It's, it's wonderful. And I think, in empowering patients, that they have the ability to not be destined to their family history. If they do have a big family history of heart attacks or heart disease, that they are not destined for that if
Yeah.
they course correct, if we can start living a little bit better ways, and not huge changes. Just, I think that's the big take home for a
Yeah.
lot of patients, that they can be just very minute changes that have profound effects,
Yeah.
you know?
What would you say to someone who's starting this journey? You and I have talked about this, but there's so much out there about menopause. Menopause is getting its day in the sun. Finally, this is a
Yeah,
good thing.
that's a
You
great
know,
thing.
we met years ago and it just wasn't like this. And you had started your practice, you were already on this topic, and now it's like it's everywhere. People are talking about it. It's getting funded in a different way than it's been funded in the past.
Thank goodness, I'm so glad.
Yeah.
So many big voices, Oprah, Maria Schreiber, like all these wonderful. And then, of course, um, all the new books coming out from physicians about it. And wow, it's just really powerful and wonderful. And to of course, have
Yeah.
people come around to your way of thinking. It's like,
Yeah, I've
yay.
been here waiting for
Uh,
y'all. Yeah.
yeah. And I think about my mentor, Marcia Scoville, nurse practitioner, who I
Yeah.
learned from early on. Boy, she was doing this 20 years ago. I mean,
Yeah.
wow, how brave she was to start practicing in that time. Um, but yeah, I'm so glad it is getting its day in the sun, and I hope it continues. Um,
Yeah.
it is still frustrating that I still have patients coming to me, um, who've gone to see their primary care, and their primary care is, you know, stated untrue facts about hormone
Yeah.
therapy. Like, oh, this hormone therapy is going to give you a heart attack, or this hormone therapy is going to, you know, cause breast cancer. It's like, well, okay, let's reframe.
Yeah.
Let's go
Yeah.
back. Let's look at, first of all, where are they getting the data from?
Yeah.
But it's changing. I do see a lot less practitioners giving us a hard time, and especially when patients go to see specialists, either their neurologist, their pulmonologist, urologist. Those
Yeah.
all seem to be much more supportive of the hormone therapy, and
Yes.
understand its positive roles. And so I get a lot less pushback from those specialties than the primary care
Yeah.
practitioners.
And do you feel like the starting place for someone starting to address this in their life is reading, is listening to podcasts. I know you and I talked about earlier, it's listening to your body first.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I definitely, seeking out a knowledgeable hormone practitioner in their area, and that can be, it's not always an endocrinologist. I don't think there are
Yeah.
actually any endocrinologists in our valley that do
Yeah.
hormone replacement therapy. Um, a lot of nurse practitioners, but just finding someone that resonates with you and someone who will sit down and educate to the try to have the most unbiased view as possible on all the hormone
Yeah.
therapies. Um, you know, so yeah, seeking out someone who's educated and again, educated not in their school system because that
Mhm.
hasn't happened to any specialties.
Yeah.
Even OBGYNs don't get educated to hormone therapy or very limited education to their hormone therapies.
Yes.
Yeah.
I bet that's gonna change with all this.
Oh
I would
yeah,
have
it
to imagine this next generation.
absolutely, it has to be. Yeah, it has to be. But I don't know if it's part of the curriculum quite yet. That's still
Right.
lagging. But I would suspect within the next 5 years, it's definitely going to be part of the curriculum. We can hope so. And then we have more options for women to seek. And
Yeah.
so I think sometimes dispelling the myth if women have fears about hormone therapy and breast cancer, Estrogen Matters is a wonderful book. By Dr. Blooming, who's an oncologist, and
Mhm.
um, Carol Tavers, I believe is her name, a PhD psychologist, kind of she wrote mistakes we've made, but I've never made them. And how hard it has been to
Yeah.
revert,
Yeah.
rethinking about hormone therapy. That was a great book. And of course, there's so many new hormone books out. The New Menopause by Dr. Haver.
Yeah.
So there's lots of good ways to get educated, and I know, and we certainly have a blog with lots of information. Um,
Yeah.
so boy, all the podcasts right now, I just pretty
Yeah.
much loving, just
Yeah.
soaking up. I think it's really fabulous. So
Yeah.
you become educated of what's acceptable and what options there are.
And
You know,
asking better questions. It
yeah,
seems like that's been a big something I've learned from you, and I think you ask them, of yourself and of the research, and you dig in, and it's a good model, and I know you've spoke to it today in this conversation of making sure that we're reflective and
yeah.
prepared when we go in to get ourselves educated.
Yeah, and I think, um, that's the biggest thing I think is being able to understand and stand your ground in a office visit with a
Yeah.
practitioner because as a physician, they are sitting in a very powerful seat, and I don't know if they all understand the power of their position.
Yeah.
I'll hear patients, say, "Oh, I can't do hormone therapy because one little thing a practitioner said, or like, oh, you shouldn't do that because you have a family history of breast cancer." Well, that's absolutely no contraindication at all to starting hormone therapy. But it's one thing that they said. It may have been in passing, and they may have not even known the evidence behind what they said.
Yeah.
And they're in such a powerful position. So, again, I think just as a patient going into your primary care, and that's a great place to start, just asking your primary care. And now if they discount, you definitely keep going because there's certainly options out there for
Yes.
you. And don't be fearful of what they say. Um, or, obviously I'm very respectful to primary care is and absolutely essential to our healthcare. But if they mention hormone therapy and you can say there's what I would educate women to is ask them how do they know
Yeah.
what they know?
Yeah.
How, if they say, well, oh, we could start hormone therapy, but I wouldn't recommend it because the risks outweigh the benefit. I would ask the questions. What are the risks?
Yeah.
How do you know that? Where is that evidence coming from? And would you mind sharing that with me? In my practice, I have on file a big stack of articles because that's what's required of me because patients are coming from this scared view of hormone therapy. So I have to share data now with them to suggest that. Now, if you go to see your
Yeah.
cardiologist and they say, okay, we're going to start you on a statin, we're going to start you on blood pressure. Now, some patients will ask, well, tell me, how do you know that? And is this going to really help me? And what are the risks and the benefits? Um, but they're not going to send you an article, or most patients don't say, oh, will you send me an article that supports what you say?
Yeah.
Because it's just
Yeah.
so common, right? Like that's such a common medication. And so I just think, understanding that your practitioner doesn't know everything.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And we have to, as practitioners, we have to be okay saying, we don't know, we don't know. But
Yeah.
to say things that they don't, like, oh, I wouldn't, that's too risky. Ask what are the risks they're thinking of, and where is this evidence coming from? And if they say the Women's Health Initiative, you can say, okay, well, they're definitely not current
Yeah.
with the most recent literature. And so then you can say, okay, well, if there's any new evidence, could you share that with me? And again, I've been asking patients this and other practitioners, and still haven't seen anything that would change my mind on hormone therapy. So
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I mean, if I would have heard that younger, again, it seems obvious, it seems simple, but we're not told those messages early on. And I love hearing you say that. And it's something that I think I can do a better job of. And I know that um, it's just a great invitation for all of us to know our own power
yeah,
and to advocate for ourselves and for our children and to ask questions that maybe we haven't heard someone else ask, but that question is inside of us, and to trust
yeah.
that needs to be pursued.
Yeah, and I would say if someone tells you something that just doesn't sit well with you, that's a good reason to investigate. Like, wow,
Yeah.
that didn't sit well with me. I'm going to look into that further and try, and
Yeah.
yeah, and trust that. Just not to get too woo woo.
Yeah. It's not too
But
woo woo. We could go way more woo woo than that. So don't worry.
yeah.
I love everything you've said. That's so powerful, to ask better questions. And that last thing that we just talked
Oh,
about, I'm really
good.
going to take that away. But let's
Oh,
go to
good.
intimacy. Something I've learned from you is your passion for sex health. And so I want to just make sure to include your perspective here and get a little bit of your point of view around this important topic. And again, it goes back to what we talked about earlier, like, oh, this is just how it is. This is how it's going to
Yeah.
be for the second part of my life. Can you speak to that passion of yours and how you've been able to help people and what we can do to have healthy sex lives, especially in the second part of our life?
Yeah. And I think this is something, I mean, I feel like I learn something new every day from my patients. And this is something I think my patients have really just opened my eyes to. I mean, I've
Yeah.
always enjoyed sex, and, sex and intimacy definitely got better for me personally when I started hormone therapy. So it was definitely a personal journey for me too. But it also is really exemplified and accentuated in my patients, just because it comes up is so often in my conversations
Yeah.
with patients about the intimacy, and just how when they started hormone therapy, because we often start testosterone in our therapy, and for men and women. And when I've seen couples, when they come in together, now most couples who come into my office have a pretty good relationship because they're coming together,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
they're on good terms. Um, but some of my favorite stories are couples after we start hormone therapy, and they say, I never knew I could be connected this way.
Yeah.
I, and it's even better when I was younger. And our connection, of course, just from the time of the marriage together or their partnership together, has continued to grow. And now with this added intimacy, it's just, I mean, it blows my mind. And
Yeah.
it's so fun to
Oh,
see.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's
It's
so
like vitality. Yeah.
oh,
Like the light in someone's eyes returns.
oh, it is. And it's just so lovely. And, I had one male patient come to me, and again, they had a beautiful relationship before, but now with them both being on, he was like, I didn't know our relationship could get better,
Yeah.
but it is. And I see her being more vulnerable with me. And this is a marriage you would have classified as A plus in the
Yeah.
beginning. And now she's more vulnerable with him. I just thought, oh my gosh, this is just so beautiful. And other couples, I saw a patient last week and she's like, I can't believe what you've got my husband talking about. I'm so glad he's talking to
Yeah.
you about his sexual function because, of course, she's like, wow, that's just made our intimacy so much better and so glad that he has someone to talk to about intimacy issues. And I think it's, again, no one's asked those questions. In our
Yeah.
clinic, we're asking, how is your intimacy? Are you satisfied with your intimacy? Are you guys balanced in your intimacy?
Yeah.
That's a big important part as well. But it's just so beautiful, and you see this in all couples. Um, you know, two women that I see, their relationship had just completely blossomed when we got them on the same intimacy level.
Yeah. I love that. It's inspiring because when you hear hormone replacement therapy, oftentimes you'll just think of a woman's life or you'll just think of menopause,
Mhm.
especially now that the conversation is getting the spotlight. And I love how you're bringing it back to relationship and connection and this aspect of life. Hormones plays a essential role in this aspect of life. And especially in these, long-term partnerships and marriages. I mean, sex is the only thing you do with your partner. You can have a deep conversation with a friend. You
Right.
can do a project with a friend, but, in a monogamous relationship, you're having sex with just one person, your partner, and
Yes.
it's so special and it's so important to your connection. So I'm
Yeah.
glad that you're bringing us there, that for listeners to realize that hormone replacement therapy and this conversation around your health impacts more than just women in menopause.
Yeah.
It's a conversation for everybody, and it's a really important conversation, especially in the middle of your life, when
Yeah.
things are starting to change.
Yeah. The relationship and something about that skin to skin contact, we do that with
Yeah.
newborn babies, right? You want that skin to skin contact. Well, skin to skin contact and later in life is beautiful too. Now, intimacy
Yeah.
looks different for everyone, and that's perfectly fine. But to discount intimacy and say, I would just make sure in all of your lifestyle experiments that you experiment with reconnecting that way, and that we don't discount that and say, oh, that's what we did when we were younger. No, and it can really elevate the quality of life and the way you live in our later years. And
Yeah.
it's just so beautiful to see and so fun to see. And I just love treating couples for
Yeah.
that reason.
And small changes, like you said earlier, small changes can have these enormous
Yes.
impacts. Better is better.
Yep. And your life is just elevated to a new level that maybe you didn't even think it could be.
Yeah. So good, Monica. I'm really, really delighted to share this conversation with people. And your voice is so calming and soothing. And
Well,
I'm just so
I
happy
love,
for people to
I could
hear
talk
you.
about it this all day, every day. I really love Adam Grant's quote when he says, improve ourselves, don't prove ourselves.
Mm,
Don't keep proving ourselves, improve ourselves. And I just love that. And I think that's where we have to come from with asking better questions, right?
yeah.
Is
Yeah.
improve. We don't stand in solid ground that or in a space that you can't question yourself
Yeah.
and others.
Yeah. I love it. Improvement.